Good evening. It's just a couple minutes past 6. Time to begin, if you're all ready. So we are scheduled for 3 hours tonight. I think we'll get quite a bit done. Lauren isn't going to be with us this evening because she's enjoying her trip to Portugal. So we miss her, but she'll be back. As a consequence, we don't have an icebreaker either. So we'll start then with the roll call vote, just so for the minutes for next meeting. Becky, we'll start on your end.
Becky Conrad. Jane Costello.
Tim Cowan.
Riley Bergeron.
Paul Jacques.
Dana Staples.
John Cleveland.
Dennis Bergeron.
Rick Whiting.
Jeff Harmon.
Kelly Butler.
Rex Rhodes.
Bruce Ryu.
Allie Toby with Barry Dunn. Carrie Willett with Barry Dunn.
Sam Pikus.
Dennis Dote, Assistant City Manager.
Phil Kroll, City Manager.
Good. Good to see you all. There are minutes from the last meeting. Are there any suggestions for additions, changes? I think I have one. I think under absences, Riley, you weren't here at the last meeting, so we just should add Riley as being absent at the last meeting. Anything else? If it's the pleasure of the board to include that change, make a motion. Make a motion to accept the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those in, raise your hand. Favor? Done. Oops, wait a minute here. So this is the public comment section of the meeting. This is the time at which we invite members of the public to give us comments or thoughts in regards to the comprehensive plan. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on. So we have on the agenda, as you noted, we're going to do a quick review. If there's any other thoughts or changes that might be suggested to the future land use plan, then we'll be spending most of our time on the land use categories this evening. So we'll start with a quick overview or where we are with the future land use plan and see if there are any additional changes or thoughts about the land use map. Allie, do you want to just quickly give them a review, perhaps maybe where we are?
Absolutely. So from the last meeting, this parcel here was split between low growth and high growth discussion to turn this full parcel into low growth and update these two parcels to a moderate growth. Updated this area over here to add in the Lost Valley parcels here up to the Lake Auburn watershed. And then there was discussion about kind of seeing what it looked like to connect moderate growth across the full strip here. And committee wanted some additional discussion just to see what that looked like. So that's split between if that low growth and moderate growth area now, just to see what that looks like. Parcels over here were squared off to follow the parcel boundary. sorry, my notes are over here and the screen's over here. Cleaned up this area here based on discussion to the ag zone parcel. Updated this handful of parcels here based on kind of direction to have this as a conditional kind of low growth or high growth dependent on a couple of policy changes or policy decisions. Updated this strip here all the way across to be moderate growth. Squared off a handful of these edges to parcel boundaries where those were identified. Returned this kind of ag zone, moderate growth zone to split after conversations with Lauren and the committee. Just have this as conditional now, kind of warranting further discussion that this is kind of a floating ag zone now that borders I-95, but outside of that, not necessarily kind of a policy reason to change this unless there's kind of a desire to have a continued kind of density through here. And then cleaned up these areas in line with current, I think it's low density, low country residential corridor here. So following some of those boundaries as they are kind of in zoning today, this strip zone all the way down. So updated and cleaned up that line. And I think that's updated. Sorry, I'm moving around a little bit. There were a handful of kind of floating moderate growth parcels that were updated up here to be in the low growth area, and then updated the Lake Auburn watershed with a layer from the Auburn Water and Sewer District, and per our last meeting, discussion to update these two parcels here along kind of the watershed boundary to be that high growth area. I think that covers the rest of the changes that we had.
Thanks, Ally.
Yep.
Are there any other questions or thoughts in regards to the map? Jeff?
Are we going to talk about the green and yellow hatched areas now or later, or what?
Yeah, no, if you want to talk about them now, I think this would be the time.
So the ones that you have up there now, Ally, why are those hatched?
So looking through the notes from the last meeting that we had, there was just some discussion around these parcels here were updated along the frontage to be moderate growth. And there were some comments about wanting to see what it looked like if these parcels should remain kind of low growth, even though they border the same road frontage with moderate growth on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, thanks for that explanation. I wasn't sure why we had hatched those, but I think those are, what's in between the yellow and the green, we changed to moderate growth because of the Lost Valley facility that's there. The one to the left that's yellow and green, it isn't any different from an agricultural purpose than what's on the, if you were driving up Perkins Ridge Road there, you know, the strip zone's on the left and on the right is in ag. So I don't see any benefit to connecting that, and leaving it as it was before, I think, is more consistent with what we're doing by not extending the strip zone to both sides of the road on the one on the left. The one on the right, I don't really have any, feelings one way or another. They're separate lots, though not owned by Lost Valley. So, I mean, they're not tied to the Lost Valley facility. We could go either way, but I think, I don't have any, deep feelings about that one either way.
Any other members have some thoughts? Dana?
Yeah, just zooming in on the yellow and green, we'll say to the right of Lost Valley. That one seems to go right through a house lot, or right through a house. It's splitting a lot. I think with the Lake Auburn watershed, I think it would probably make sense just to leave it as is. I don't see any value really in changing it there.
Leaving it as,
Leaving it as low,
low.
yeah, the brown, whatever.
Yeah. Oh, Dennis.
Not having been at the last meeting and being a little bit familiar with the slopes and the way things work there and where the drainage is and everything, I can't imagine why you would want to put those two hatched areas into moderate growth.
Would it be the pleasure of the committee to leave those in the agricultural resource protection zone? Okay. Thumbs are up. There's this sort of orphaned agricultural area that's in a striped area. Got orphaned, I think, when they rezoned along the old, I think it's the old Danville Road. And so that was the back part that didn't get zoned and stayed agricultural. Is there a sense there would be any benefit to, well, maybe I'll put it the other way. Is there more of a benefit that it stays as it was? That there isn't roads or utilities that go into that area? Jeff?
So I took another look at this after we discussed it the last time. I guess at least my view of this hasn't changed, which is this doesn't now align with sort of the principles we're using about growth from the core out. And what's hatched right now is the backside of lots. The front of it, which borders the road, is in a strip zone, which is why it's moderate growth. So it would seem to me that what's hatched yellow and green there now should be moderate growth. Because otherwise you're going to have an island of low growth on partial lots stuck between a high growth and a moderate growth area.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts? Dana?
Yeah, I just pulled up the parcel map for the city, and in that one that, I'm sorry, I'm still looking at the other one. We're talking about this one now? Thank you. All right. That one, I think there's very little value to leaving it where it is or to changing. I feel like this is kind of a nothing burger. I don't think that there's really going to be a substantial change one way or the other. I think ultimately what you're doing here is if you take that out of the ag zone, then you're probably raising somebody's taxes because their land is no longer taxed as though it's ag zone. I think that's the only change because generally speaking, you've got CMP corridor that goes through there. I don't think there's really much that you're going to do to develop it. So whatever the committee wants, I'd say.
Other thoughts?
I agree with Dana.
Okay.
Are these parcels where the railroad runs through parallel with Washington? I'm trying to wrap my head around.
No, I think if you're driving out towards Danville, they're like between where Danville, I'm trying to remember the names of streets, but it's before you get out to Danville Corner. And they're to the right, and they're quite nice homesteads with deep back lots that go up to the turnpike. That's my memory. Am I right? Is that how you remember it, Dana?
Yeah, I mean, one of those parcels right on the corner of Hackett and Old Danville basically is a cemetery. And then you do have one parcel on Hackett Road that, I mean, this could mean a real change to that parcel, the one that, right there, yep, just north of your cursor. There's a bigger one. That parcel, that would be a substantial change for that parcel. The rest of it, I don't know.
Jeff?
I think the core point that the committee needs to think about is if we leave this as ag, it's completely different than how we've dealt with this throughout the city. And there's lots of other places where we had strip zones and we conformed this. And, you know, if this was flipped around the other side and you had a rectangular piece that was in ag sticking into the moderate growth area, I'd say, okay, leave it. But it's not. And that's where I came down on this, is you're applying your principles in an inconsistent way, because we can go find a dozen places just like this throughout this map where what we've done is not split these like this, especially when it's between a high growth and a moderate growth zone.
Any other comments? Tim?
Yeah, I agree with Mayor Harmon that because of the scenario here, I think we are opening ourselves up to rediscussion of what we tried to set for our patterns and our principles of revising this, the growth areas. So for that end, I would recommend that we make this moderate growth.
Any further thoughts? I'm not too sure how much the taxes would be affected, because not sure the degree to which the back lots would be seen as highly developable. That changes, even if it's in a moderate growth, sort of like the back lots that you people may own, they don't get charged the same thing as the way their house is. That where because that's a developed lot. The balance of your land that may be in the back and not readily accessible usually gets valued at a lower rate because of that. You know, maybe slightly bigger, higher, but I'm not sure it's a huge change. You know?
It just occurred to me, I wonder if that larger parcel that we were looking at, is that the Maine Turnpike Authority and like a bunch of their buildings? I think it might be. Okay, yeah, so I don't think that it's a, yeah.
So, what's your feeling? Do you want to make that conform to the moderate growth? Or do you want to maintain it as kind of an island of ag zone? Well, let me push the question then. All those who would like to include it in the moderate zone, thumbs up. Well, hey, unanimous. Okay. We'll make a change, Ellie.
Gotcha. And then this last area is dependent on a couple of policy decisions as discussed, Title VII or other. So I think, is the committee comfortable leaving this as is, or is there further discussion that I'd like to have either way?
There's an update on that. I think it's this coming week. Anyways, it's right after Lauren gets back. She set up a meeting with the people from Ag and Maine Farmland Trust and stuff to work on this, to try to resolve it, to give some better information to the committee, whether it should remain ag or whether the Title VII provisions would work, so.
Yeah, I think there'd be a useful conversation on that, and I think that the farm folks are investing some money in their farm, so this would be a good time to discuss their plans with them. So we'll leave that for the time being.
Could I just say something?
Uh,
We're the ones that own that, so, you know, when you guys want to talk to us about the farmland,
I-
my name is George Spiegel. You're talking about the farm over there on West Hodgeback Road, correct?
Yeah?
That's our land.
Oh, okay.
That's why I came tonight, because
Oh, okay,
my
you,
land trust talked to me, and so I haven't been to the meeting, so I just came to see, you know.
okay. Well, we're not making any changes from that at this point.
Right, because we're getting ready to do a $1.2 million expansion.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I didn't know protocols, we talked about conversation, someone coming, I didn't know if you're gonna deal with that tonight or what, so I'm just here.
Yeah, so as the mayor indicated, that apparently a meeting is going to be set up with you to talk about it, and we'll welcome well, perhaps you'll come to a good decision on it from that discussion, but you come to the next meeting, or actually our next meeting on the 24th, so it's a little too early probably. But after that, come to our meetings or communicate it with us. We'd love to know what your thoughts are about that property.
All right, that'd be good. That's why I'm here tonight, because, the lady from Farmland Trust called me and said, hey, did you know they're talking about your farm? And I said, no.
Jeff?
Just to add a little context, and the committee can jump in here if I misspeak, I think that the discussion that's taken place to this point is the realization of the agricultural activity that's going on there and the need to be able to support that going forward. So it's really I guess I would characterize what the committee's grappling with is what's the best method to do that. So there's several alternatives. So Lauren Cafe from the staff, as the chair pointed out, is off on vacation, but she has a meeting set up with the Department of Agriculture and the folks from Maine Farmland Trust when she gets back to gather more information. And then she's going to be calling you, set up a meeting. Basically, we're at this point trying to gather information about what the best path forward is there so that we do good planning, but we don't adversely affect the agricultural activity that's going on.
I'm glad you came to listen to what we're doing. We're trying to find the best solution for everybody. So if there's nothing further about the future land use map, we'll move on to the land use categories. You all got some worksheets to work on previously, and those were the ones who all turned in. Ally has kind of blended them together, including with some traditional kind of descriptions for a variety of zones. I believe there are 9 here that are listed. My thought that best way to maybe proceed is have Ally briefly review what each of those categories are, get your thoughts or input in regards to that description, whether you think things should be added or deleted. So we'll have a good understanding of what those categories are, and then we can go to the map and look at them where they're actually tentatively, for discussions, located on the maps. And then add further comment in regards to where the locations are and the size and the appropriateness of the suggested land use categories. So if that sounds useful to all of you, I will ask Ally to go through them quickly. We'll pause after each one, I think, probably to see if you have some input, and once we proceed with all of that, we'll go to the maps.
Thank you all for providing input. As John said, this is a blend of a lot of different feedback, and this is a conceptual framework for us to start our discussion tonight. And as we go through this, I want to talk through, are there other areas that are kind of truly distinct and different, and is the vision for those areas different? What does that look like? Confirm some of these different areas and really talk through that vision and confirm these concepts. So through this process, identified these kind of based on the growth area boundaries. Some of you provided like streets and addresses, and some of you provided zoning districts and zones to conform to. So this is a best blend of some of that. But from a high growth area perspective, have the Great Falls Plaza area, mixed use corridors, mixed use neighborhoods, high density residential and industrial areas. For the moderate growth, kind of a neighborhood transition area and residential corridors. And then for the low growth, agriculture, open space, and drinking water protection. So starting with kind of the downtown Great Falls Plaza area, kind of where we're like physically sitting today. Land use here kind of follows that traditional kind of Main Street pattern, taller buildings, very mixed use, kind of place centric. So sidewalks, buildings are up to the street. You kind of feel that kind of commercial level floor level use, either offices or apartments kind of above that, filling in some of that more very dense traditional Main Street pattern of development. John, do you want me to just walk through all of these at a high level and then discuss them?
Looking at the description for the downtown Great Falls Plaza area, do you have questions about the descriptions, or? I'll just get a clarification, because Jeff, I know at some point you had discussed the Great Falls as being something a little different than the downtown. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I think that's the question that Ally's posing. Do you want her to run through and just sort of set the stage about what each district is, then we can go back and have a discussion about them? I'm happy to jump in with my comments any place, but...
Okay. Let's do it that way.
Okay. The next category are these larger mixed-use corridors. So those kind of primary corridor areas where today it's largely kind of larger box stores as you get kind of up here on Center Street, out along Minot Avenue, Washington Street corridor, those areas that have been talked about that are ripe for more mixed-use development, kind of reinvestment in those areas. So looking at current commercial uses, continuing kind of that commercial pattern of development, but infilling that with mixed-use, larger multifamily homes, and really kind of pushing that density along these major transportation corridors that can handle that infrastructure. In the areas kind of immediately around that Great Falls Plaza area, those mixed-use neighborhoods, today those are the form-based code districts. Those have historically been mixed-use, more dense neighborhood-style developments, smaller lots, homes taking up more space on those lots, and then some neighborhood-scaled commercial uses in there, whether those are smaller auto shops or cafes, kind of corner store style look there. So that includes kind of these more dense neighborhoods surrounding kind of where we're sitting today through New Auburn area. And then this kind of compact residential or neighborhood residential infills the rest of that high growth area that's outside of that downtown area and those industrial areas. So filling that in kind of with different types of residential development, looking at kind of more dense development towards these inner high growth areas. And then as you get out towards those kind of less developed areas today, as you transition into those more moderate growth or lower growth, looking at cluster subdivisions or other types of residential uses. And then industrial, really investing in those industrial spaces. So those larger manufacturing facilities, logistics, areas that are along these major transportation corridors, whether that's I-95, whether that's railway or whether that's the airport infrastructure here. And then transitioning to the moderate growth areas, the kind of two here are this neighborhood transition, so less dense than the more urban areas in the high growth zone, predominantly residential with a handful of smaller neighborhood scale commercial uses, the Lost Valley ski areas in this area, so kind of fostering that balance between transitioning from high density to low density, encouraging recreation open space, but also more of that kind of moderate transition area between. And then the residential corridors, so these kind of strip corridors that extend out to provide a little bit more residential opportunity in those more rural areas. Agriculture, forestry, recreation, so ag zone kind of today, more rural in use, encouraging kind of more traditional natural resource based uses, forestry, agriculture, recreation, and open space protection. And then a drinking water protection area over Lake Auburn, so really restricting kind of uses that are there. Recreation open space, very, very low impact uses to be able to protect that water quality in Lake Auburn. So at a high level, presenting kind of these 9 categories as a starting point. Can start wherever. Also, if there's areas that we want to talk through that are truly different from what are here, kind of what are those and what are those characteristics? What does that look like and feel like in the future? And then with what's here, are there any kind of modifications that we need, any kind of discrepancies between how the committee sees some of these areas? And as we transition, these are kind of broad visions for these areas for the future that kind of help set the stage for future zoning updates after this process.
Would it be the pleasure of the committee to start with the first, the downtown, and kind of work our way from there? Jeff?
Yeah, so my comments related to the high growth areas, and what I think is a potential need for another land use characteristic besides just the downtown Great Falls Plaza and the mixed use corridor. So I think there's 3 potential areas that I would see as somewhat different than most of what's in the red area of downtown, but which would have potentially high-density development, and those would be Great Falls Plaza. Great Falls Plaza today is differentiated from downtown because one of the predominant differences is building height. So in our kind of historical or long-term downtown area, you know, putting up a 12-story building or something wouldn't fit in the middle of Main Street. So there's been a differentiation between Main Street going down into New Auburn and Great Falls Plaza. I think that differentiation should remain. I think that besides just Great Falls Plaza and something around that, we can decide what the actual borders might be. The mall area is another area that I think should be treated sort of the same way because, you know, long term, it seems very unlikely that the mall as we know it is going to be there, and there's great potential for redevelopment. And the third area I would consider for this is some area right around exit 75. And to me, the difference between the mixed-use corridor, which is what's up on Center Street and what's on Washington Street, and downtown, that's on the map now, is really around density and the building characteristics. So downtown on Main Street, we want to maintain a close relationship between the public and private realm, right? You want the buildings close to the public street. if you redevelop someplace like the mall, you might want that, but it might not be with a public street because you might create a number of buildings and businesses and things within that area. And so within the privately held land, it might feel like being on Main Street, but it wouldn't be a public street. I think in those areas, we might want to consider not just sort of guidance about upper density, but we might want to set a threshold for density when it's residential. In other words, if you're going to build something, say at the mall or on Exit 75 or Great Falls Plaza, that has a mixture of businesses and residential, you might want to have a minimum threshold of density that you have to achieve if you're going to build in that areas. Maybe it's not a great example, but you remember in Lewiston a few years, roughly 10 years or so ago now, on Lisbon Street, the cable company bought a lot, came in and put a one-story wood frame, pitched roof structure, and it doesn't fit with anything that's there. So if we were to create something like this, you want to make sure that you're achieving the goal and not have lesser uses. So you may want to have like a minimum density threshold if there's residential. You may not want to have the same restrictions on height. I mean, I think there's a bunch of discussion that can be had about caps on buildings' heights, but today, other than Great Falls Plaza, it's 4 stories. And if you're thinking about redevelopment in the mall area or new development around Exit 75, you may be constraining the deployment of capital to do these things by putting these artificial barriers in. So, personally, I think in these areas you might not have a height cap, right? And leave it to what's feasible to develop. I mean, that's a conversation to be had. I know everyone doesn't agree with just saying that there's no height. Same with density, right? You might designate it as high density with no cap on the top, right? If you're going to have a highly dense mixed-use area, let them build it out. And part of this is to create these small cores, and the other part of this is to find areas of the city where we can maximize density and growth to avoid sprawl out into other areas, especially in a patchwork way. So I think that perhaps we could have another category and apply it to those 3 areas. But, I'd certainly like to hear more from the committee about what they think about that idea.
Dana?
I like where you're going with it. One of the things that I see as a potential issue with what you're talking about, the mall area, is it kind of forces us into a development pattern where you build at the very highest ability of the land all at once. And so what I mean by that is, in order to get anything done there, you would need to have a significant investment in the area. And not that we can't get that, but to me, it just makes, if you put such a high barrier there, to me, it almost makes it like pie in the sky. Like maybe one of these days this will happen, unless, I don't know, maybe you know something I don't. But I don't know if there's a better option, but when you were saying that, one thing that came into my mind was maybe not so much a minimum density as much as a maximum lot size per unit. So if you had like a 1 unit and you got a tiny lot, you got a really tiny lot, I don't know if that would achieve it or not, but that just popped into my head while you were talking.
Other folks have sense of visions where that might go, Paul?
Again, I wholly agree with Jeff, and I do think like getting rid of the parking lot restrictions and number of parking spaces. It's allowing developers to have some vision. They also still need to come in front of planning board and council and stuff to get it, to make sure that we're okay with that. But allowing that creativity to come in and see what can happen.
I agree. I like the idea of 3 nodes with higher density and higher height, particularly Great Falls Plaza, although there was some controversy about that in the past. But at the mall, I could conceive of development of properties with parking under the structure, like you see a lot in Portland. It's a pretty cost-effective way, especially if you're going to do a tall building with an elevator. And you can get that density there. And there's opportunity in that area with so much surface parking to bring back some green space if you go higher and make it a really attractive place to be.
There are some taller buildings even beginning near the mall area. Mount Auburn apartment buildings are there, and the Marriott Hotel is not far away. Of course, in the Great Falls, you got the Esplanade Building and 2 Great Falls Plaza, and so it seems like it's a direction that was going in, and do we want to encourage that for good land use planning? Which would, yep, Jane?
Yeah, all of this makes a lot of sense to me, and it also, as I was looking at the sort of pinkish color for the downtown Great Falls Plaza, it makes a lot of sense to me to kind of separate the Great Falls as a separate node or whatever. But also, as I was looking at this, I thought, well, once you move beyond Bonnie Park or something, that neighborhood doesn't look all that different once you get across the Little Androscoggin into New Auburn, so that it makes more sense to redraw this so that you have, the Great Falls node, and then the rest of this joins up with whatever it is that New Auburn is currently. Just historically and in terms of the kind of houses that are already there and the kind of mixed usage.
Likewise with the infrastructure that's already there that really can't go much further.
I would just say the exception there should be where the New Auburn plan is on, on the inside of Mill Street to the river. I think that area, the plan has always been to make that redeveloped, and I think the idea would be that it would be a higher density development. So I think we want to make sure we carve that out, but I agree with Jane. I think that makes sense.
Is there a general consensus then that creating another category as described that would be even more dense and with higher building possibilities we should create, and that those areas are the Great Falls, the mall area out on Center Street and near the interchange with 75?
I guess I'm curious about where that would be and where 75 is.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'd like to see on a map kind of exactly what spatially those other nodes are.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
This is the interchange area right now. So current land use is industrial, and current zoning is kind of general business going down here.
Would that be the Kitty Hawk, where the Irving, where the gas stations are? Is that generally the area, Jeff?
Yeah, I think we need to work through that. I don't have like a very specific boundary in mind, but I think it's some ways up Washington Street from the Turnpike, some ways south of that. we have the high growth going out towards Eastman and Poland Spring Road. I don't know that you want to extend this too far off Washington Street there, but I think that you want to have some opportunity to do this, especially with the mobility capabilities with the turnpike, at least in that Washington Ave strip.
Yeah, Rick?
I think, as I recall, City Council worked on language related to that area pertaining to the tech hub. And so we could kind of mirror that area. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember being excited about that because we're trying to attract high-tech businesses, and look at Portland with the Rue Center, off Washington Ave there. It's really big and beautiful and going to stimulate a lot of activity in that particular neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, from a land use perspective, what I'm curious about though is right there we have a high cluster of industrial uses, and so there's some retail, but it's it's corner stores and gas stations and hotels. I think at some point, if we were going to do something over there, there'd be a good argument to have some higher density housing. But I don't know how that intermingles with the existing land uses we currently have on the Kitty Hawk Hotel area. I mean, I'd love to see how that might work. Yeah.
I know in other communities, particularly where there's a major highway and interstate and an exchange, often larger scale activities go on there because it's easy to access in and out. Folks often may be going there for particular purposes. I'm thinking in Augusta where the Civic Center is located in that area. Now there's some retail activities in that area as well. Folks who are not necessarily coming to the center of town for an activity, but businesses that would use the infrastructure out there to create a destination for individuals. And certainly I could see some hotel kind of activity going there as well. Other visions?
We would need to be careful about, I forget the exact term that Jonathan Labonte was talking about last week, as the area of influence for the airport. So we just have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, yes, for the height, yeah, right.
I was just going to mention, I happened to just drive past what you described a minute ago today, and there is residential starting in that area too. Apartment.
Yeah, that's
Residential.
right, yeah, yeah. But I think, still to be more granularly determined just what the area would be, but there's opportunity there, I think, for more dense growth. Would it be including exit 75, that the pleasure of the committee? So we'll have a new category, which will include some area around exit 75, the Great Falls area, and an area around the mall. Rick?
I would say that, except I would echo what Dana said about having it be subject to this overlay for the airport, overlay zone, so that you wouldn't have conflict with the building heights, because that's been an issue with planning board in the past. I don't know if Dennis was with me, but it was a bad mistake that was quickly defeated. The building that was too high on a backup runway flight path, where the building was going to be missed by airplanes taking off by about a foot, so.
Yeah, so that certainly would be an issue that needed to be fleshed out more.
Yeah,
Bruce?
John, if we do that, when you read about the land use category, it kind of takes industrial out of it. If we change that area, and that area is highly industrial right now, I mean, you've got international paper and get
Jeff?
Yeah, and Bruce raises a really good point, and I don't think that the intent is to move any of what's in industrial that's shown on here now into this new category. It would be outside that along Washington Street, because those plants aren't going anyplace.
I understand that, but, but by changing this category, you've taken industrial off the table.
No,
No.
I think
if
we're
industry wants to go in those areas,
Well, I
you're kind
think-
of taking it off.
I think we're creating a new category that would, I don't know which map. I'm looking at the map in the story map, and it's like a darker brown.
Is that the mixed-use corridor?
Yeah, thank you. There's a mixed-use corridor now, and change part of that to this, but not affecting the piece that's residential. Excuse me, industrial.
That, thumbs up if it's okay? Okay.
And just to follow up on that, John, I'm assuming what's going to happen, Ally, is we'll have this discussion tonight. You guys will go back, look at this in more detail, and come back with some change for the committee to look at and see what folks think about that.
Yep.
Right.
We'll work on kind of adding these.
And I would just add to that, just to, as you look at this, don't necessarily try to make them all fit in the same thing. I mean, I think the idea here is that there are 3 areas where we want to kind of focus on some of these higher density developments, and not so much to say they all need to be the same thing.
So with kind of conceptually thinking about the land use categories themselves, they don't necessarily have to have the same concrete boundaries and borders that maybe with the state legislation, the high growth, high density and other areas do. We could look at also having kind of a conceptual kind of core density model with that, where maybe there's kind of a circle around this exit 75 interchange, and the future zoning off of that would be to implement kind of this higher density mixed use core around here. And this map talks about kind of the desired characteristics and the desired state for this specific area. And the zoning boundaries would be decided on at a later date based on kind of further investigation into quality of life things and kind of other items that would impact here. Same for the Auburn Mall area, and same for the Great Falls Plaza area. If we want to think about these as kind of cores with different types of uses or densities radiating out from there. That's another thought. If the committee has a preference either way, we're happy to kind of think through either one of those options.
Yeah. So this will be a process, obviously, and there'll be more than another time to take a look at them. I mean, in fact, on the 24th, that's a quick turnaround for you folks, but depending where we end tonight, we're going to continue. If we haven't completed, we'll continue on the 24th.
And with these two, also want to think about kind of community engagement early in this process too. So as we're talking about land use categories, getting some feedback, kind of checkpoint, temperature check if we have these conceptual frameworks for these different areas for the community to be able to weigh in early in that process so that there can be kind of further refinement after as well.
Yeah, our hope would be that in the month of April, we would have a conceptual future land use map and land use categories that we could go out to the public with and get their feedback. And obviously, we would want to be open to what those comments would be to see if any further adjustments would be appropriate.
Not in relation to that new category that we were just talking about, but the general downtown and the description that says the trails and paths, which to me connotes off street walking, and later on in the form it says something about sidewalks, but I think something about pedestrian ease was a lot of the public input mentioned that, so I don't know if that could be included in the description.
Yeah, we can update that language. I think that's an interesting area with the Androscoggin River Trail and sidewalk connectivity and kind of this public-private realm that we can, kind of that public
I
ease
definitely want
piece of
trails
it.
and paths part of it, but I thought the sidewalk was a
Jane?
Yeah, I was just thinking close to the same thing, because if we start talking about the area out at the mall or out near exit, the turnpike exit, that poses very different challenges, I would think, in terms of, especially out at the turnpike, to make that genuinely connective to the city. I mean, there might be some real opportunities there, but throughout this, like, to really think about what's going to make people who want to bike or walk or whatever through such an enormous city as Auburn, or, landmass. So, yeah, just to kind of flag that as an important part.
Yeah, and I think maybe the way that I would suggest that we work through that is to separate the downtown on this map, or the Great Falls Plaza, what it's called, Great Falls Plaza, call it downtown, and then draw a circle around Great Falls Plaza, draw a circle around the mall, draw a circle, and those are separate. Like, we still have a downtown, but then there's these other things, and one of them happens to be in the downtown. I think that's the way my mind works with that one.
And hopefully this pilot program and LAP program where they have bus service that goes out to 75 catches on, and that becomes a convenient connector between that exit and the downtown area. Well, the rest of the transportation system. Jeff?
To follow up on Jane's point, to things that are currently in process, right? So the city already has funding to extend the Riverwalk from Moulton Field down to the area of Brickyard Circle. That's obviously a little further ahead than the next piece, which is the Washington Street Corridor Study, which has multimodal access that will connect from that location down to the area of the Exit 75 Park and Ride, for the very point that Jane's raising, which is, besides a car, what ability are you going to get if you do development in that area? Are they going to get to other things that they might want to visit in the downtown area? And then the city's engaged with the Casco Bay Trail communities that got the interim trail designation in the legislature last session, which ends at the city line, the New Gloucester Auburn line. And so the city's planning staff, one of the things they're looking for in the future is then how do they connect the Washington Street corridor plan to where the Casco Bay Trail interim trail designation ends, so that not only can you come downtown, you can go in both directions.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and especially at 75, which I do think has huge potential for this. I was coming down from the Bangor airport, which is why I stopped in Augusta and saw what that little area was like. But you don't want that to be an island, because I'm reminded of our friend who said at one of our open sessions that I sleep in Auburn, that's all I do. And if we make the 75 exit that attractive to live here and get on the turnpike, we're defeating our own purpose. So that connectivity in this vision, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's a good point. Rick?
What I'd like to see for pedestrian and cyclist, travel is like what they have in, Massachusetts along the Charles River, Memorial Drive and Storrow Drive. There are not as many, but many, many people on those walkways along the Charles River as there are in those highways. So lots of people getting healthy healthy exercise on the way to work.
Becky?
Sorry, and I really do think this vision for planning and this land use is an important moment for us because it feels like we're flipping the paradigm. And I've lived here a long time, and if you look at it, it feels like we thought about, well, whether we thought about it or not, what we have is disconnected. And if you start thinking about the connectivity first, I think then you spur development around people wanting to be in those places and be connected to the other places. The isolation of some of our services, I think, has probably precluded us from having some of the, kinds of things we see in other communities because that connectivity isn't the first thing we've put forward as our development ideal.
Well, that may be some of the description in the land use is putting language in that talks about it being connected with various mobility modes.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that, as I think about this more, the one thing that comes to mind over and over again is that all three of those areas could potentially be the highest, we'll say, targets or the highest density or the highest desire for development. But none of them have the bones that the downtown already has, right? So the downtown is a feeder system into that development if that happens, where you have, I don't even know how many people are right there already that could walk to that. And those other two, I mean, not that they can't get there, but they certainly don't have that now. And so I think, you might say that those are the highest potentials for development in the city, but I still feel as though they attract different types of development, even though I think the description here is the same. And I want all those buildings as tall as possible.
You want the penthouse suite?
I don't want to live in the penthouse, but I want skyscrapers.
Any other discussion on these three development areas? Okay.
John, just to follow up on Dana's comment, as I'm thinking through this, I'm imagining there almost could be a prioritization for those cores, potentially. But, I think keys to, ensuring where there's similarities is connectivity. For me, Great Falls and the mall, it's repurposing areas that are, because of time and transition and how people use it, have become underutilized. Whereas down in next 75, it could be a little bit different characteristic there. So, or sets of characteristics.
Okay. I think that moves us on to the next land use category, the mixed use corridors. Obviously, we've talked about a couple of points on the north end and the south end. We're looking at Washington Street, Minot Avenue, Center Street. Dana?
I think I'd just add here that I think that the meeting going on across the hall right now is probably gonna be more informative as to what the future development in these areas are than necessarily what we come up with in this room. Because I feel like the street design is really what is driving any of the development that you see here. So beyond that, I don't really have any changes here, I don't think.
And certainly Center Street's quite well developed, in the sense of number of structures that are built there, focuses a great deal on commerce, some housing. Minot Avenue, Dennis, you worked on that at one time when I think the planning board was looking at it, or Yeah, you guys remember that. Yeah. And then Washington Street's got a major study and plan going with that. And if that moves forward, probably longer in the future, that will be quite a transition for that area as well. In fact, if the bridge is built as well, it would connect it more directly over to Broad Street down to New Auburn. Are there any thoughts, additions, or? Yeah.
Question on those sort of bump outs that are just below the lake. The rest of it's pretty much like strip, corridor, but those sort of extend out. And I think I know the answer, but just want to talk about that.
So these follow kind of general business areas today. So this is kind of a blend of kind of existing uses and kind of preserving kind of the base level of what is there today, and then how do you add and transform that in line with the community's vision. So these kind of fronted areas here are business with state kind of changes. Those would be mixed use areas. So.
Can I ask a question? Dana, I've somehow kind of like maybe zoned out when you were making your comment. Could you repeat? Because I think I share your concern, but I wanted to hear again.
Well, I think my general point is that how we design our streets is going to largely affect what types of things we allow on these corridors. And I was referencing there's a Minot Avenue study. Actually, it's Court Street tonight, but they're discussing like what are we going to do with Minot Avenue. I think the same thing goes for Washington Street and Center Street. I mean, all three of those are prime for some type of change at this point, and whatever those changes end up being, I think is going to inform what types of things are going to thrive there for businesses or residential uses or whatever it is.
Yeah, I do agree. And when I read the description of this land use category with the bottom paragraph about sidewalk and bike networks allow for access to jobs, site design standards, tree-lined streets, buffered sidewalks, that's really different than what we've got now. And so if you're going to try to attract, like if you're going to allow apartment house building out there and hope for it to become some kind of pleasant public space, it just, I guess I'm just saying the obvious. It needs to be really rethought.
Yeah.
I think what Jane and Dana are pointing out is a really difficult challenge for the city, right? Because we have this relatively high-speed north-south corridor, which is Center Street and Washington Street, and east-west, which is Minot Ave and the lower part of Court Street. And the reality of that is it's not going to change much because it's not within the control of the city, and it has huge implications from an economic development standpoint in the western Maine area. So there may be some things like the Washington Street corridor is trying, has the advantage of it split into 2 lanes, so we can try to get both. It's going to be a really difficult challenge on Minot Avenue and Center Street because we don't have that capability of 2 lanes, and we're not going to be able to reduce the overall traffic flow, current traffic flow, or projected traffic flow, because those roads aren't in our control, number one, and the people that control them aren't going to cause the economic development downturn that would be caused if we radically change those corridors into more residential. So, you know, it's a very difficult challenge. I think Dana brought up the Court Street one, and I think there's more capabilities in places like Court Street to radically change what that looks like, which would mean pushing some of that traffic off onto Minot Avenue, right? So it's kind of a balancing act to figure out what's the best solution for this, because we've been dealt cards that aren't the best urban planning cards that we could have, but it's what we've got, and it's going to be difficult to work with those.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Rick?
The good news, though, is if we can succeed in doing that split with Washington Street, where the current southbound becomes two-way, and you make the current northbound like a neighborhood street, then we can achieve some of these objectives that will make that a very attractive place to be in the future. You got to get through a lot of hoops first, but that will be a real chance to do it right there anyways.
And I think the point was well made that Route 4, Center Street is a major transportation artery going north up to Franklin County. That's their major route. Washington Street connects south, and Minot Avenue goes west, and you know, that's a transportation system that serves those particular regions, and so you've got real conflicting. So maybe the thing is, how do you use those in a way that is good urban planning as you can have, but recognizing the degree to which you keep those as transportation routes so that they're not, somebody's not using their GIS to go through the back roads to get around some of the traffic lights or other things going on, and now you're starting to push that traffic into the residential areas.
I'm not Lauren, I'm actually Sam.
I'm sorry, Sam,
I'm
trying
Lauren
to
for
dot my
tonight,
I's
but-
all the way around the room. Go ahead.
This is sort of a question or comment, I guess, partially of Barry Dunn and I guess partially of the committee. But just looking at this, it seems to follow the current zoning lines, like Ali said. I think some of this appears to follow the general business zone. But if this is in high growth, high density, it seems like it could get really like strip mall-y and really car dependent. And so I guess my question for the committee, since I haven't been involved in this process, really is sort of in thinking about growth. My understanding is it's about high density, but it's also about public investment as well. You know, where you want to see the most amount of change. So if this is mixed use corridor and you could have people living here, you could have commercial uses, it might disconnect people from the core downtown where they could, you know, meet their neighbors for a cup of coffee and socialize and you know, ride their bikes to work, that sort of thing. So I guess, I don't know if that's a question or if that's clear, but it's just sort of I guess, an observation.
No, I think, you know, there's a tension going on between those different uses and making them meet the full potential of both simultaneously is kind of conflicting. So it's how do you minimize the negative impacts and try to maintain the positive ones. And so it will be a challenge, and I think, as has been said, the degree to which we have control is less, and what's happened already. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't have some little bit creative kind of uses. You know, you encourage more common curb cuts, so you don't have as many along the road. if you have the space and the lots to do it, as opposed to having that and providing some opportunity where people go to a local diner. There's more than one, I think, right on Minot Avenue where people do go and meet. I like to go out there and have breakfast frequently. You too?
Well, to that point, and not to go so far as Jeff took us, which I obviously agree with the micro areas, but to your point, John, the route, I used to commute coming out of Portland, and Friday nights, it's Massachusetts, Connecticut, getting off the turnpike with me to go to Sugarloaf, to go up to, to Sunday River people get off in Gray, right? The Sugarloaf people come to Auburn. So those businesses love that. That's a different experience than the Minot Avenue, which really impacts Court Street, which is screaming to be residential, has a school. Minot Avenue has a school.
Right.
So, we really could think about them a little bit differently, I think, in terms of both design, as you've just described, and kind of the best use. And Minot Avenue is still much more of a blank slate than Center Street.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. Ally?
Couple of notes with this too. With these areas in particular being commercial today with state legislative changes, if it's commercial, you have to allow for some level of residential development in those areas. So this land use category considers that.
Yeah.
But with specific areas too, kind of through the implementation of the comp plan, there's further opportunity to evaluate through zoning, form-based code, and other things, kind of how different treatments should be applied to kind of more specific areas as well. So this sets a vision and a direction for, we'd like to see different types of mixed use along these corridors, and through the zoning process can get further granular detail into what's feasible based on current road design or conditions or ownership and those types of things.
And it also occurs to me that, the routes that we're talking about, is particularly you talk about getting off the turnpike and moving forward, the transportation networks for commercial transportation, truck driving, to serve Franklin County, Somerset County, Oxford County, there's no turnpike up there. And this is where they have to get off, and this is where they travel back and forth for commerce that serves this whole region. So it's another accommodation that has to be made. Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I appreciate Ally raising this point, because I look at it this way. So we're going to do the comp plan. We're going to have land use characteristics. When we then conform the zoning to the land use characteristics, the zoning can't violate that, but there's nothing that says that you couldn't have more than one district regulation within that same, and that's, I think, what Ally's saying, which I think fits in very nicely with Becky's comment, which is, we could have this land use characteristic, but when then you get to the zoning, the actual district regulations could be somewhat different between Center Street and Minot Avenue, recognizing we want to have a different outcome there.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Yeah, these land use characteristics in the comp plan are intended to be somewhat more general and broader, whereas the zoning can be much more particular and still be consistent with the land use plan. Yeah, any more on the mixed use corridor? Next one is, let's see.
Looking at
Yeah,
mixed-use
mixed-use neighborhood.
neighborhoods, so these are, again, kind of those more compact mixed-use neighborhoods. So looking at more dense residential development, not quite as dense as these cores that we've been talking about, and not quite as large of a kind of multifamily feel or other type of feel you might get along some of those major corridors. But following kind of that traditional neighborhood layout, some smaller single-family homes, multifamily homes, and then businesses that kind of fit the context and the scale of the neighborhood that they're in.
Could you explain to me what is the island there off, it's south of Minot?
Yeah, this is kind of a floating form-based code area that's a mixed-use area today that falls just outside of the general business areas. If there's a different vision for this area, whether that's kind of predominantly residential and makes sense to be in more of that kind of compact residential, or if it makes sense to continue to be mixed use, but for this baseline, didn't want to down zone anything from what's allowed there kind of today with the mixed use pieces.
That's Manley Road
Yes.
below Rodman Road, and it's got all the hotel
Hotel
comes,
Road.
Manley and Hotel come to a point there, and, you know, it goes over to Poland Road, and it's got all those side streets.
And I think this would be an area where even though, well, it covers, well, let's see, get those pink areas there.
It's surrounded by industrial kind of on this southwestern end, and then is along kind of this Minot Avenue corridor up top.
Yeah, there's a variety of different uses in this. It's not quite as homogeneous as the description might be. Some of them are more single family or 2-3 family, 2.5 story. Some of them have higher 3 or 4 stories, but not other areas. Some have some existing neighborhood businesses, some don't. So there's a variation of that description within that category, within that map. Right.
In the past, I think the concern was that there'd be like encroaching industrial creep into the neighborhood. But I think what's happened over time is that residential real estate's gotten so expensive that that's not as much of a risk. So it seems like a reasonable thing to sort of keep it as it is, because it's probably not changing too much.
Where it is, yeah. Ally, between the downtown in New Auburn and in this mixed-use neighborhood, where does that pinkish red stop and the other one begin? I can't tell from here.
Along the river.
I see. Little Androscoggin, okay. Did we, See, so if you look at that New Auburn area, certainly that area is highly developed with 3-4 story buildings on very tight lots. That's not the same description if you go and look at some of the other neighborhoods that are more 2-3 single family, 2-family, 2.5 story neighborhoods. There's quite a difference because, you know, New Auburn built those tenement buildings for the workforce that was going to the mills, so they could walk to them, which is somewhat different than some of those others.
I guess from a kind of land use category, as we're talking about kind of broad visions here, is in New Auburn, there's a mix of more dense residential and commercial uses. Is that kind of truly a different land use category on its own than other kind of neighborhoods here that might have some other types of residential, but also some commercial? Like, is the vision for that area truly different as a land use category?
I think this is where,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jane.
Jane?
well, this is kind of going back to what I said earlier. This puzzles me because I actually think that if you go across to Laurel Hill, Newberry Street, and then up to Bonnie Park, that's also, they're old, gorgeous homes that have been cut into apartments, and there's some small businesses there. So I puzzle over sort of why the river there is a boundary line, and especially when the mayor started talking about, these nodes, it seemed like, well, then what's yellow here really ought to extend somehow up into that area.
We can make that.
I mean, that
update.
would be my thinking.
Dana?
Yeah, I think what I was going to say is similar along those lines. If you were to draw a line down Main Street to the intersection of Broad Street to the intersection of Mill Street out to the river, basically what I'm saying is, well, make it simple. Go across the Little Androscoggin, just drag it down, right there. You could extend that pink or red or whatever color out across Mill Street and then out to the Lewiston Bridge, out to just that one little. Yeah. Yep. You could do that. You might not even need that triangular shape. You could cut it straight across where that is. But that area is basically the heart of the New Auburn Master Plan, where we're trying to, like, there's a vision for some higher density stuff and some taller buildings. So it might make sense to put it in the red.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Dana.
Just to expand on your thought, Dana, I like that. Are you thinking of maybe that goes out to southeast border of that extension being Cook Street, or not that far, just abroad?
Oh, you could, I don't know, does it make sense to go to the Androscoggin, just cut it straight across where, was that Mill Street, right across? I'm not married to the idea.
I'm seeing you. Okay, I get what you're saying, yeah.
Well, it
Thank you.
Yeah, it might go out Second Street and maybe down Dunn or something like that.
Yeah, or to include the St. Louis Church.
Yeah, right, Third Street, yeah. I think the aspiration was to try to implement the New Auburn Development Downtown Plan, so. Of course, you've got the Lown Bridge there, which is a major connection between Lewiston and Auburn at that point. Other thoughts about that mixed use? Ally, how would
I just
we-
want to
how
come
would-
back with another, I can't tell, like Dana's saying like pull the pink over and I'm saying pull the yellow over. So it's like we've got competing blankets here and we're
Yeah.
pulling in different
Yes.
directions.
Yes.
Ally, what's the difference in terms of vision? I mean, I think Dana and I are both saying that like there's not a lot actually separating those neighborhoods as it is, but what's the vision in the land use that would somehow distinguish one from the other?
Guess we'd want to know that from the committee. We have kind of that Great Falls, breaking that out as kind of this very high density area, but there's kind of this rest of this kind of Main Street area. What does that separate? Like, what is the vision for that? And is that different from kind of other land use visions that are included in this already?
I like the suggestion, Dana's version, because it for me it connects the there's a downtown of New Auburn and there's a downtown on the other side, and whatever we call that section might be Main Street. It's a great suggestion that there is that continuity, right? But it has a slightly different potential purpose or growth than some of the neighborhoods that start going up the hill in New Auburn.
Correct.
Yeah, we spend quite a bit of money in the downtown section of New Auburn in conjunction with what Dana was talking about with that master plan. So I think it makes sense to bump it there, not necessarily up the hill much, but at least, Broad Street below, that kind of thing, and over to the river, over to, like by the Rollerdrome, that area, just to sort of comply with the intent of the New Auburn master plan.
You got the Barker Mill complex there too. So, I'm sorry.
So are we suggesting that we would go, if you look at the map, there's Route 136, which would be La Rochelle Seafood, the old High Style Caterers used to be there, and Humbrian Hardware, and that area all the way to the river, and not going up the hill.
Yeah.
So not include like Roy's Foodland or that bank complex that's there, or actually that would be on both sides of the road, so we'd probably be okay.
Yeah, maybe go up south, include Mill Street, and go over to Broad Street, maybe to around Third Street.
As high as Third Street, because then you get into residences where down the hill there, you're talking about businesses.
If you were to, I think of paint where you have the ability to have a really small dot or a really big dot. When you draw, use a big dot and draw it down Mill Street, and I think that'll cover basically what Bruce is just talking about, where you've got businesses on both sides of Mill Street. Where there's a small grocery store there called Roy's Foodland right on the corner of Mill and Broad.
Right.
And so that, I think, yeah, and then the Boys and Girls Club is actually labeled there on the map. Yeah, you're right on it. You're right there in the middle.
Yeah, that's sort of the area I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's kind of a little tug with which way the line is going here?
So Roy's is on the corner of Third and Broad.
Right.
So it would be that side of Third Street, the
Yeah.
Roy's side of Third.
Yeah. Go up, I think you'd want to include. Yeah, well, you probably want to include the Boys and Girls Club in there. Oh, Paul, sorry.
I think maybe to ease the concern, understood, they would probably have two different zones eventually, with what's allowed to be built there.
Maybe rather than solve this at a parcel level, we should.
No, we shouldn't get too far down to the details there. All right, more comments about the mixed-use neighborhoods? All right, seeing none, and that brings us to compact residential neighborhoods.
This is kind of what's left in the high-growth area once you get through kind of those mixed-use areas, mixed-use corridors, industrial, and then that kind of downtown Great Falls development.
I think one thing that struck me here is the absence of allowing for any kind of a small corner store, or like a small business, like maybe a pizza shop or something like that. I think all of these areas that I'm seeing right now are all kind of adjacent to those types of things. So I don't know that we necessarily need to add them here, but I hate to restrict those uses if there's a desire for that to happen within the land use.
The descriptions here kind of are directed somewhat by accommodating the state law, having 4-unit buildings and that kind of thing.
There's some areas in here that don't have water and sewer today, and some that do. So this is kind of balancing the need for kind of this very high transition in these areas that are probably closer to your more dense areas that can accommodate more development. And then there are certain areas that do butt up against kind of ag zone or very rural areas. So kind of thinking about kind of a transition or kind of a bleeding edge out to that area. So thinking through kind of compact out to maybe some more conservation style, cluster style developments as you get out there that still allows for that density, but kind of transitions from kind of more of a built environment to more of that rural setting.
Depending on which other zone it butts against, as you were
Could you,
saying.
John, I'm having a hard time hearing you. If you could use the, I just didn't hear your last comment.
Oh. Well, I was trying to pick up on Ally's comment of transitioning from a little bit denser areas, kind of pale areas, and then as you get closer to the rural areas, you may not have as quite as a dense. It'd be a transitioning through that zone. Oh, I'm sorry. Rick?
Yeah, I think to Dana's point that what you may find with these is that, you know, where they are kind of transitional areas, you may find sort of borderline properties that may want rezoning at some point, and it wouldn't be inconsistent. It wouldn't be spot zoning because you're right next to a more intense zone. So it's sort of okay to have this, knowing that you may tweak the edges of it over time, you know, without too much opposition from anybody.
John, just to Dana's point, and following up on Rick's, 2 of these zones actually have golf courses, right? So that's technically a business, right? So I think that's kind of, we might just want to tweak the language just to build in that naturally.
Yeah. We can certainly add that in.
Any other observation about this particular zone? Nope.
Can I just
Becky?
clarify, when you say business, how we're going to tweak it? I mean, we're not thinking like auto body shop, are we?
We can phrase it as kind of neighborhood serving, retail opportunities, restaurants, cafes, recreation-based businesses, some other.
I mean, I'm not against auto body shops.
Very-
I use them periodically.
We
but,
can keep it broad.
I'm thinking if it's meant to be residential,
No, it's a great point. I think we'd want to make sure that what language gets adjusted is appropriate for the zone, but the reality being it doesn't mention anything about any kind of business, and there's 2 there, so.
Any other observations about the compact residential area? I think that brings us to industrial.
This is all current industrial land.
Yes.
And the airport is in this area, and this is an area where maybe with an overlay or some others, we would talk about characteristics that wouldn't impede on the airport's activity.
And as part of the policy objective actions for this future land use piece, overlays would be kind of a zoning tool that would be recommended through this. So looking at if that's a desired an airport overlay that during the zoning process would sit on top of existing zoning to protect airport operations.
Rick?
Did we have discussion at some point about the state, new state legislation allowing for housing and industrial, and do we need to address that?
Do you want to?
No.
I think with updated legislation that it excludes industrial. The initial bill did not, but subsequent kind of policy has amended that.
My only point being that, you know, if at some point we had some industry that decided there wasn't enough housing for their worker, and they could find a way to do it near their business, and it wasn't done in a way that was environmentally bad or problematic from a, you know, city standpoint, municipal standpoint, that we might allow it, but not as a, you know, sort of a special exception, not the norm.
And I think the intent of having kind of that exit 75 area and some of those mixed use, higher density areas surrounding industrial is to think through some of that in a way that's a little bit more environmentally sensitive to kind of human habitation.
Yeah, I think the legislative decision was to make sure there was no residential and industrial zones because of the limited amount of land area that's zoned industrial. And the key to this, to Rick's point, is transportation, right? So things like that's going on like with WorkLink and with the on-demand transportation is how do you get them from where you're going to have your residential stuff in a quick, efficient way out to these areas where the businesses are.
This pretty much covers the areas that are currently industrial. Any further comments on the industrial area? All right.
So I guess I'd have a question. Do you think we have enough industrial land for the next 10 years?
It's a good question. It seems to me that there, some of, well, I guess there's actually 2 points to that question. One is there physically the land? And the next question is, who controls it? What is their interest in developing it as industrial land?
We do have an industrial park that's basically empty over there.
Right.
So,
Right.
and I'm sure that they're chomping at the bit to get that filled. So
Yeah.
I think we're in good shape.
Yeah.
And would the mixed use in some cases, if there was some need in the next 10 years to expand that mixed use corridor, does that fit the intent of, I mean, it says commercial, but that could be very different from industrial.
It might fit like light manufacturing and like other things that might be more compatible with kind of that mixed use piece of it. So allowing for some flexibility and not just kind of standalone commercial brick and mortar stores, but kind of more compatible, lower intensity kind of manufacturing or other uses.
There are no further comments about the industrial. I think with neighborhood transition zone in the moderate density area.
Based on committee feedback, there was a desire to kind of split the moderate growth into 2 areas. So what's on the screen here, this kind of moderate density or neighborhood transition, and then kind of more of those strip corridors that extend out into more of the rural areas. So having those kind of be more residential focused street front development, and then these being more of your typical kind of moderate density neighborhood style. This description does include some mixed use. I think, Tim, to your point earlier, Lost Valley is here, so wanted to have some level of opportunity for some commercial expansion as kind of appropriate to scale and context.
So my impression was that this is the moderate growth version of compact residential.
Yeah.
And it's about trying to transition and keep some of the rural or more country feel of Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that came through pretty strong in the committee's feedback, that along these areas, wanting to have a little bit of a transition or preserve some of the open spaces that exist today while still accommodating for that future kind of growth and housing and other things that are needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I look at this, I remember it was the committee's desire to include, for the lack of a better term, the area north of Stevens Mills and south of Taylor Pond in this zone or in this neighborhood or whatever we're calling it. And I would just say that that's probably the highest density area within this land use. And I think it's fine in here. I just want to caution that that part of Auburn is probably not really the same as the rest of this this color, but as long as the zoning allows for, you know, the homes that already exist there, I think I'm fine with it. So.
Jeff.
Yeah, so this is, I think, a prime example of where you might have two district zoning regulations between these two areas. I think they're in this categorization for a couple different purposes, right? It's really very much transitional on the south of 95, and to the area Dana's talking about, south of Taylor Pond. It's really an environmental concern to not put it in the growth zone, and it is different. You could probably have two different district regulations that might govern that.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Any other comments on the neighborhood transition? Seeing none, residential corridors. Those are the ones that have the fingers that go out more into the rural areas. Kind of the strip zones out into the rural areas. Pretty much what exists today. And I think the description pretty much fits what's out there today as well, and for the anticipation in the future. Any other observations about this zone? Okay.
Just, John, just for the record, I really do like the split that you've helped create between the neighborhood transition and the residential corridor. So it's great to distinguish these.
Becky?
Well, this land use, I think you might want to look at this from my perspective for the compact residential. I think that kind of characterizes what we're trying to say, correct, around business?
Yeah, yep. Great observation.
Any other observations about this zone? Drinking water protection. Well, I'm sorry, I skipped over one. Excuse me.
So this
The
includes,
agricultural recreation open space.
this is everything that's in the low growth area with the exception of the Lake Auburn watershed area.
Oh, Dana, go ahead.
This is a really minor point, but you have Taylor Pond inside of this zone, and Lake Auburn's not. So I don't know. Maybe take the body of water out.
So we
yeah.
separated out the Lake Auburn watershed as its own. So we can, if it looks kind of weird like
Yeah.
this,
Yeah,
we
that's-
can take out the water, but
It's fine. I'm just.
okay.
It is. Yeah. That is true.
Plus, it gives you two shades of green. You know, one's blue-green, and makes it more aesthetically pleasing.
I'm remembering in the northern part, when we were looking at this, there were a couple of orphaned islands up in the north because they weren't in the watershed. But there is a clustered housing in those areas. And those might be, I don't know what the zone is, little residential clusters primarily. And they don't really fit the description of the agricultural resource protection. Jeff?
Ally can probably remind us, but my recollection was that there were two moderate growth islands up there, and we changed them to low growth. I think this is another example of where you're going to have district regulations, because I don't think we want the extent of the development that moderate would allow up there. But at the same time, you're not going to want to apply an ag zone type district regulation to those places. So, you could very well have a couple different district zoning regulations that apply so that you can have housing there, but not to the extent that you would have if it was in moderate growth.
So
Well,
today
my observation is that with the language you currently have, that would be a little bit of a stretch, I think, to say that. So I'm not quite sure how to resolve that issue, but that the current language is much more restrictive than that. But there should be, I agree with the concept. I'm not quite sure how you get there. But, those are little clusters of development that are there and are going to stay there.
I was thinking that the last sentence, some residential uses are allowed and are often secondary to other uses, does account for that, but maybe you can do some additional editing to that to make it even clearer.
Well, the agricultural resource protection area currently does not have, single-family housing is not a permitted primary use. It's an auxiliary use. You have to have one of the primary uses first. That's what makes it so restrictive.
John?
But that's not what we're talking about here, right? This is a land use category and not ag zone.
Well, you have a description in there that's very restrictive.
John, perhaps we could consider putting this back into medium and have the same as a residential corridor.
Yeah, something like that. That might work.
That fits the current zoning. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Any other observations about the agricultural resource protection area, low-density area? I think that brings us to the drinking water protection at this, around Lake Auburn.
Actually, John, sorry.
Oh, Becky?
I did have a question. Hypothetically, what if someone, and this maybe this is more in zoning than land use, but what if someone wanted to have a farm-to-table restaurant in the ag zone or in this land use? A country inn, farm-to-table, they grow the vegetables, they grow the...
If it's so they have a farm.
Well, I don't know how big of a farm it is.
Well, it would have to be a bona fide farm.
Okay.
Have to meet that definition. And it would seem to me that if they had met the definition of a bona fide farm, then if that could be an associated agricultural activity where they're preparing meals where people can come and consume the meals.
Okay.
Be my, off the top of my head, but you gotta have a farm first.
I'm thinking about our ag zone, and I'm thinking about corn and cows may not be our future, right? So what other ways can we preserve the land and keep it an ag zone? What if someone wants, do we have a second to do some hypotheticals as we think this through? What if someone wants to grow, I think this is actually happening in Monmouth, tulips and from bulbs, year-round flower delivery of tulips, and have
If it's a bona fide.
shop. Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, if you have a bona fide tulip growing farm.
Okay.
I'm
getting-
Here it,
I'm getting a vibe over here.
No, I think, yeah, as you're just processing this, and we're certainly working through that now, but I think that, yeah, I mean, if it aligns with like agritourism, right, and to an extent of like Wallingford's has, there's some things that are happening within that area that would certainly allow that. But I think it's really going to be specific on
Right, and what if the
full plan.
tulip farm gets so successful, they have, little small places where people can come and stay and learn how to grow tulips. I'm getting silly, I don't mean to be, but I'm just trying to think of where this is a moment to talk about this, I think, because this land use area is,
yeah,
So we have to be a little careful here, I think, about crossing the boundary between land use characteristics and zoning regulations. So today, you could not, the current zoning, you can't have a restaurant. Doesn't matter if it's on a farm or not. So we'll have to think about how we write this, because as a balancing act, I think if we went back to the people who do agriculture and forestry work and things in the ag zone, and you said, okay, well, if this gets great, you can build, in effect, a hotel here, I don't think that would fly. So it's quite restrictive, as John pointed out today. There are a list of permitted uses in the ag zone. I think that level of detail would be after the comp plan process when we examine the district regulations. We just have to think about the characteristics not being written so tightly that they become a zoning regulation in and of themselves.
yeah, that was my concern. I guess a much better example would be a winery. Like, what if Willow's Awake wanted to come, something like Willow's Awake out in Green? That's purely agricultural, growing the grapes, but the restaurant, the weddings and all that is not in them. So if you allowed the grapes, so I'm just trying to think.
That doesn't seem actually as, different really from what Kathy Shaw is doing now in South Auburn. She has both a farm and a small shop.
So I think to Becky's point, you're talking about up in Leeds, right? Willow Wake, number 10, the restaurant. So I think that's different from Kathy's farm. I don't think some of the stuff that they do up there, grow the grapes, sell that stuff, sell wine, you could do. They also have a restaurant. That's not permitted today. I think we just don't want to write this so tight that you're being a district regulation, a zoning regulation, and then we'll have to get to that, because folks that were involved, this went on 4 or 5 years, and there was, I don't know how many, hundreds of hours of meetings. But you raise a good point, is that tightly tied to agriculture, that might be something when they look at the zoning regulation that would fit in there.
I've been trying to think about the future, because I'm a huge supporter of the ag zone, don't get me wrong, but I'm also trying to think of the world around us changing and opportunities that are going to come our way that we haven't been thinking about. I mean, we will become a vineyard area California's going to stop producing wine eventually. We see that happening. So I do think this is opportunity. We want to make sure we, as you say, just don't restrict it so much that we can't even have the conversation later.
Any other observations about the low-density development or the drinking water protection? Drinking water protection is, you know, something that's been developed within the last couple of years, or been updated in the last couple of years.
John, I wonder if one way to address what Becky's talking about is inside of the ag zone, at least inside of the land use description of the, not necessarily the zone, but the land use, is to say businesses accessory to farming are permitted. And just leave it at that, and like zoning will take care of it when it does, but at least the comp plan doesn't say you can't.
We can update the typical, say, like typical land uses include agricultural and farming activities and supported businesses, and keep it at that. I think we want to be careful about also being too broad that kind of
I mean, it's
there's
not,
discrepancy on the other end of kind of what is considered a supporting business or not. It's a tight walk with kind of how I think the committee wants to balance this.
yeah, I think that's good.
Other observations? We've come to the end of the current land use characteristics. I thought we just did that one. Okay. Are there, do you think there should be any other land use characteristics categories? Or does this cover it pretty well? Okay.
I think with what we've talked about tonight, the one major addition of having these hubs that we want to be looking at, what is here is, I think really works well. So,
Okay.
thanks for the work.
Ally, I think our thought was that at the next meeting, which is next 24th, not
We'll
far.
have some updates. They might be a little bit closer to kind of Monday, Tuesday timeframe. Lauren's out of town, so I'll be sending out the agenda package again. It'll just be updated versions of what we've walked through today. And then at the next meeting, also plan to just talk through kind of engagement approach around these areas as well. And Lauren will be back at the next meeting too. So.
Okay. We've gotten through this agenda in 2 hours. There's nothing further that keeps you here. We can adjourn.
I'm gonna go check.